Authenticity and consistency are two very important factors in being a good writer. Unless you are an historian, shall we say, like Shelby Foote or Bob Bell or David McCullough or any of those folks, you're working with fiction. And so you have a certain maneuverability, if you will. However, you still have to follow natural laws, because you have to have credibility. If you're writing a detective, especially a police procedural, they have to follow the forensic guidelines. They have to follow the protocols. You can't skip around because somebody who knows what you're talking about is going to spot that. And then you have destroyed your credibility with them, and they are probably never going to read your stuff again. An example that I have is in my own life. There was a miniseries dealing with an American spy that was caught in the 1980s. He was caught spying for the Russians. And it was a miniseries about the lady FBI agent that caught him. And I was really looking forward to seeing it because I was writing books. I was setting some of them in this time period and dealing with this, double agents and whatnot. I'm watching it. It was really good. It was a fast-paced thing, and it would switch between Moscow and Washington. Now, when they do that, TV editors and everything, they will have what are called filler scenes, where they just have these pictures of Washington or Moscow or a city street or something that isn't necessarily part of the story or the dialogue, but it is kind of enlivening and contributing to the story to keep everything fast-paced without having to go through a whole bunch of different scenes with actors and so on. I was really getting into it until they had one scene, and it's just a filler scene, and it was on for less than 4 seconds, but it had one very important detail that I caught that completely ruined the entire thing for me, and I shut it off because I just couldn't stay in watching it anymore. It had a scene of the Moscow cityscape at dawn. One of the things it showed was the sunlight hitting the gold domes of Christ the Savior Cathedral. Beautiful. Breathtaking, fantastic. Just one problem. This story was set in the early 1980s. That cathedral wasn't built then. The Hall of the People was there. Big swimming pool. After the fall of the Soviet Union, that building was torn down, and Christ the Savior Cathedral, which had originally been there before Stalin destroyed it to build, his big monument, the Stalin era building was torn down and the cathedral was rebuilt after the 1990s. So I saw that and it just kind of killed it for me. And it was just something the average person wouldn't have noticed and have gone on watching, but I saw it and I realized you're not paying attention to a very basic detail like this. You kind of ruin the credibility of the rest of the show. A few years later, I was at a crime writers conference, and they had a panel, and one of the women that was there was the creative editor for that network, and she had worked on that program. Very proud of what she did, and this is what she was talking about, and da-da-da-da-da, and I wanted to take her aside and tell her, I'm somebody you kind of ruined it for because you were pretty careless with XYZ, but it's just me. But I always go into my writing realizing that there's going to be somebody out there who's going to be paying attention to these little details, and you got to be careful because that might be, a do or die for them. So the drawback to that is when you're doing your research, you tend to get caught in these little rabbit holes that you go down and you get totally enveloped in all the minutia that goes into, what you're writing about. Do it enough to get a general sense. Have an understanding of what a character would do in this situation. What details would they follow? Get an idea of where location would be placed on the map. What would the weather be like? You don't have to find out that on October 10th, 1874, it was 72 degrees with 80% humidity and the sun rose at thus and such on a sunny day in October in 1873. As so-and-so was walking down the street enjoying the unseasonable warmth of, Indian summer, da-da-da-da-da. There, you got it all covered. You got authenticity, and that brings us to consistency. As I've mentioned before in another video, characters have to develop. The development usually takes a process, at least the novel you're working in. Sometimes a series. It doesn't go from one chapter to the other, unless something really, really, dramatic has happened between point A and point B. You know, a character doesn't go from being a really nice person to a complete jerk, or being a side, background character, secondary character to the main character in the story. You got to kind of have some consistency. Don't jump around with them a lot. If something happens that makes them have, this road to the Damascus conversion, that's fine, but there has to be an explanation to that, why you're making a change. Because otherwise, your readers aren't going to want to follow along with you. They are not going to want to pay attention to this because you're not making it possible for them to hang on to the story and follow it. So know what you're talking about and be sure that you say it the same way throughout your story, unless the change is part of the storyline. Authenticity and consistency.